Hello, I'm Jessica Manzi, Redwood City's Transportation Manager. I'd like to briefly introduce you to the grade separation feasibility study and provide an update on where we are. The grade separation feasibility study has three primary goals: to analyze feasible grade separation options, to select a long-term strategy, that's to say which crossings should we separate and when, and to prepare a conceptual level design that can be used to advance the grade separation project to the environmental phase. And just to remind you, a grade separation is when you have a physical separation between the railroad tracks and a crossing street. They can be built by raising or lowering the railroad tracks or the crossing streets, or by closing the street altogether. This image is at the Jefferson Avenue grade separation. In this case, the railroad stayed at its original grade and Jefferson Avenue goes under the tracks. In Redwood City, we have three creeks that run underground across the railroad tracks. Due to the cost and technical challenges with lowering the tracks under the creeks, all of the grade separation options we're considering have the tracks being raised, not lowered. We started the grade separation study because we wanted to increase safety, to reconnect neighborhoods that are separated by the tracks, to reduce congestion, and to reduce horn noise. Another reason to consider grade separations now is to support Caltrain's plans for increased service that will improve mobility for our residents and within the region. Improving transportation options also helps meet our climate action goals and makes it easier for people to get to and from Redwood City without a car. As I mentioned, one reason we're considering grade separations now is to accommodate planned growth in Caltrain's 2040 service vision. By 2040, regional growth projections show that there will be 1.2 million more people living and working within 2 miles of Caltrain stations. This is a 40% increase from today. Caltrain's 2040 service vision will dramatically increase train service to help move these people around our communities. As train service increases, gate downtimes and congestion on local streets could also increase if we don't build grade separations. Before the pandemic, we had 92 trains per day. This could go up to as many as 398 per day. During commute times, Caltrain's plan is to go from 10 trains per hour to up to 24. In order for this amount of train activity to work, there needs to be a 4-track transfer station in the middle of the Caltrain corridor. Caltrain's operational analyses have identified that downtown Redwood City is the best place for this hub station. To build a 4-track station that accommodates increased transit service, we need additional width at and approaching the station platforms, and the tracks need to be separated from any crossing streets. So to the extent possible, when we're designing this new station, we want to avoid recently constructed development and coordinate as much as possible with redevelopment projects to minimize any right-of-way costs and potential impacts. This is a key reason why transit district planning is being done now, to capitalize on the redevelopment of Sequoia Station to get the space needed for a new transit center and grade separations. Incorporating a hub station into our grade separation work makes us eligible for funding that wouldn't otherwise be available to us, because while we will benefit more from train service in Redwood City, we'll also be helping improve regional transit. As a reminder, the grade separation study is being together with the planning for the transit district, since the transportation improvements need more space and require that the existing CVS and Safeway buildings be moved farther away from the tracks. This slide shows the transit district area. The Sequoia Station property is privately owned, with the transit center and Prairie Street lots owned by the Joint Powers Board and the San Mateo County Transit District. As a subset of the transit district, a new mixed-use development has been proposed on the privately owned land next to the transit center. While a lot of our work and focus is on the downtown and transit district, this map shows that there's development activity along the whole length of the Caltrain corridor in Redwood City. By planning for grade separations now, we will understand what space is needed to build grade separations, and we can incorporate the space needs into our planning documents and hopefully reduce the overall cost of the project. This slide gives you a high-level overview of the project development process for grade separations. We're currently in the very first stage, where we identify feasible alternatives that can be advanced through the environmental review process, detailed design, and eventually construction. Given the size and complexity of these projects, they typically take 8 to 10 years, assuming that we can identify funding for each step in the process. Our grade separations will likely cost hundreds of millions of dollars and could ultimately cost over $1 billion if all of the grade all of the crossings are separated with a new hub station. As I mentioned earlier, combining the grade separation work with the creation of a hub station will expand available funding sources and improve our ability to compete for grant funding. These images show where the grade crossings are in Redwood City and how the height of the tracks change. The circles are where there are at-grade crossings. We have Whipple Avenue, Brewster Avenue, Broadway, Maple Street, Main Street, and Chestnut Street. The triangles are where we already have grade separations. Jefferson Avenue goes under the railroad tracks and Woodside Road goes over them. The bottom image shows the height of the tracks. As you can see, they are highest on the left where the tracks are coming down from San Carlos, and then they hit a low point at Broadway where the train station is. And then they rise slightly until they get under Woodside Road. This image also shows where we have 3 creeks that cross under the railroad tracks. Again, because of the creeks, it's not practical for the tracks to go under the roads. So all of the options we're considering for grade separations have the tracks going over the road at different heights. The other constraint we have is to get the tracks back down to the existing grade to get under the Woodside Road overcrossing. Our consultant team developed a series of criteria that we have been and continue to use to evaluate project alternatives. In some of our earlier outreach, we asked you for feedback on which criteria is most important. The items with an asterisk are those that the community selected as being the most important when we evaluate grade separation options. As you might expect, reducing delays, improving connectivity across the tracks, especially for people walking and riding bikes, and increasing safety were the top priorities. Planning for this project has been going on for 2 years, and we've done a lot of technical work and outreach to understand what our options are and what the community's priorities are for grade separations. And the highlights of what we heard from the community: there's very strong support for separating 1 or more streets from the Caltrain tracks. There's also a willingness to closing 1 or more streets if people walking and biking can still cross the tracks, for example, via a tunnel under the tracks. And the most important streets to separate are Whipple, Brewster, Broadway, and Main. Based on these technical constraints and community feedback, the alternatives were narrowed down to what we're currently studying. If you'd like more information on the original alternatives, you can see them in the archived virtual town hall room or on the project webpage. Whipple is the community's highest priority for grade separating, so all of the options we're considering include building a grade separation at Whipple. Another key justification for narrowing down possible alternatives is the increased Caltrain service. From a technical perspective, we know that with a 4-track station, we would have to build grade separations at Brewster and Broadway. Since the tracks are already elevated coming from San Carlos and would need to be elevated at Brewster and Broadway, Whipple needs to be separated as well. For these reasons, we eliminated the alternatives that only grade separate Whipple. When evaluating how buses would operate at the new transit center, it became clear that closing Broadway to vehicles would make bus service much less convenient and less efficient, which led to the elimination of any alternatives that closed Broadway to vehicles. Our options for the southern crossings are quite different due to existing constraints. First, the tracks get back to grade to get underneath Woodside Road. Second, at Maple Street, the street would be closed to vehicles because lowering the street would affect the creek, which is right next to it. Main Street carries the most traffic in the southern crossings and was a community priority to keep open. So we're proposing that it be grade separated for all modes: vehicles, bikes, and pedestrians. Finally, at Chestnut Street, we have 2 options: keeping it open for all modes, which we call alternative 1A, or keeping it open for people walking and biking, and we call this alternative 1B. In the next group of slides, I'll walk you through our 3 remaining alternatives at a high level. We also have another video that describes these alternatives in more detail. The graphics illustrate options at each of the at-grade crossings. The symbols identify who can cross at each location: people walking, people riding bikes, or people in motorized vehicles. There's also a color and symbol at the grade crossings, which indicates how and whether the street is grade separated. In this slide, we're illustrating what is being proposed at the northern 3 crossings. At each crossing, for 3 remaining alternatives, for all 3 remaining alternatives being considered, the railroad tracks would be elevated above Whipple, Brewster, and Broadway, and the crossings would be open to all users. Now I'll describe the options for the southern crossings at Maple, Main, and Chestnut Streets. When we're considering the southern crossings, it's important to understand that we have to decide what happens to Maple, Main, and Chestnut all together. Because they're located so close to one another, and because it takes trains a very long time to climb or go down, all three have to be grade separated together, or none of them can be grade separated. It's a package deal. These graphics show the two options for separating all of the crossings. Alternative 1A would have Main and Chestnut open for everyone, and Maple Street as a bike pedestrian only crossing. Alternative 1B would have Main open for everyone, and Maple and Chestnut as bike and pedestrian only crossings. Another option would be to keep Maple, Main, and Chestnut streets as at-grade crossings, similar to the way they look today. In this option, the northern crossings would be grade separated, allowing for the expanded train station and the grade separation at Whipple, but the southern crossings would not. We're calling this Alternative 2. If Alternative 2 were chosen as the preferred option, there would still be changes to the crossings. Each of the crossings would get safety improvements, such as having gates at all four corners of the crossing, but you would experience longer delays when train service increases, and the tracks would continue to be a barrier for the community. Again, please watch the alternatives video to learn more about these options. We've updated all of the information that's available online, both in the virtual room and on the project webpage. This is an image from the virtual room with updated project information. As with the last virtual room, you can click on the video wall, boards, news rack, and aerial map to learn more. Now that you have a high-level overview of the alternatives, please go explore the virtual town hall. Learn more about each alternative and the options at each grade crossing. Look at the evaluation matrix, which summarizes how each alternative performs against the evaluation criteria, and most importantly, take the survey. If you have questions, post them in the room or on the project webpage, or email us. After we complete this round of outreach, we'll incorporate the survey feedback into our study recommendations. These findings will be presented to the Transportation Advisory Committee, and the study recommendations will be taken to the City Council. We'll continue our work with Caltrain to get funding and start the next phase of work, which is creating a combined station and grade separation project and studying its environmental effects. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to hearing from you.